The thick silence in the lobby of Liberty Bank was broken only by the sharp sound of an ID card hitting the polished marble floor. Behind the bulletproof glass, Karen, the teller on duty that morning, wore an expression so detached it bordered on contempt. On the other side of the glass stood Maya, her posture straight and her gaze unflinching, even as she felt the sting of invisible eyes judging her mere presence. No apology or explanation followed the careless toss of her ID, just the cold and suffocating sense that everyone nearby would prefer to act as if she was not even there. In that moment, something inside Maya cracked, the sting of having her dignity bruised mixed with a deep anger. But instead of letting it show, she took a steady breath and remained upright, refusing to let the moment pull her into an argument she would never win. The lobby, with its fancy lighting and spotless floors meant to impress clients, suddenly felt more threatening than welcoming, especially to anyone who dared not fit into whatever silent rules had been drawn there. Maya realized she was being tested in a place that promised openness, but in reality expected conformity and quiet obedience. Maya had woken up that morning with a list of simple things to get done, and stopping by Liberty Bank was at the top. She entered the branch ready to handle her business quickly, never expecting anything out of the ordinary, but the coldness that greeted her at the counter was immediate. Karen barely looked up from her computer, and when she did, her eyes narrowed as if trying to figure out what Maya was doing there. As Maya explained the reason for her visit, a routine transfer, the suspicion in Karen's voice made the simple task feel unnecessarily complicated. Every request for an extra document, every double check of information, dragged out the process until it felt almost like an interrogation. The difference between Maya's calm, professional approach and Karen's thinly veiled doubt was impossible to ignore. Each minute that stretched on sent a clear message: Maya was not welcome, and her presence was, at best, a disruption. In reply to Karen's unnecessary questions, Maya remained steadfast. She answered politely and clearly, making sure not to give in to irritation. It was exhausting having to defend her right to basic service, especially in a place that claimed to treat every customer with respect. The lobby felt less like a community bank and more like a stage where Maya's dignity was constantly being tested by small acts of disrespect. Eventually, Karen looked up from her stack of forms and actually made eye contact with Maya. But instead of offering any hint of a smile or a word of basic courtesy, Karen's first move was to question her. She started asking for identification again, then asked repeated questions about Maya's account history and the actual reason she was there, all in a tone that made it sound like Maya was trying to get away with something. There was no real protocol guiding these questions, and Maya could tell that this wasn't how other customers were treated. It felt more like Karen was following an invisible script, one shaped by her own biases. With each answer that Maya gave, always calm, always patient, the tension at the counter seemed to rise. Maya could see that no matter how clear or complete her responses were, her presence alone seemed to unsettle Karen, as though she was challenging some unwritten rule about who was allowed in that branch and who was not. Others waiting in line noticed what was happening, exchanging quiet glances or shifting their weight, uneasy but unwilling to say anything. The discomfort didn't just hang around Maya, it spread, silent and heavy, through the whole room. The worst moment came when Karen, without a hint of apology or explanation, tossed Maya's ID down onto the shiny marble tiles. The sharp sound of the plastic hitting the floor seemed to echo across the room, louder than it should have, making even those waiting in line wince. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Karen just stared, her face blank, refusing to acknowledge she had done anything wrong. It was as if she had made her feelings about Maya's presence clear for everyone to see. Maya knew everyone was watching her, waiting to see how she would respond. She took a slow, steady breath and knelt gracefully to pick up her ID card. The silence made her every movement feel heavier, but she didn't let her composure falter, no matter how much she wanted the moment to be over. As she stood back up, she met Karen's gaze, refusing to look away or shrink into herself. In that quiet confrontation, there was a clear message. Maya was not going to be humiliated, and she would not let Karen's attitude define her. The small act, picking up her own ID with dignity, stood out in a place where disrespect had become strangely ordinary, quietly challenging the way things were done. Maya tried not to let the humiliation sink in too deep, but it lingered as she walked over to the front desk, hoping someone else might actually help her. The receptionist, a young man named Brian, glanced up only briefly before focusing back on his screen. Maya cleared her throat softly and explained her situation, but Brian hardly acknowledged her. He barely nodded, gesturing vaguely with his hand, as if he hoped she would just walk away without making a scene. The silence between them was thick enough to feel uncomfortable, and the message was clear. She was not going to get any support there. While Maya waited, she noticed a line forming behind her. A well-dressed woman entered, greeted by cheerful hellos and warm smiles from both Brian and Karen. The difference in treatment was impossible to miss. Another man in a suit, someone Maya recognized from a news article as a local business owner, was ushered in ahead of everyone, handed a bottle of water, and offered a seat. Watching these VIP customers receive endless courtesy, Maya felt the unfairness press in a little more with each passing minute. She understood then that respect in this place was not for everyone. In that bank, it felt reserved for a privileged few. Despite Brian's clear indifference, Maya stood her ground by the reception desk. She straightened her shoulders and refused to let the lack of kindness push her out the door. She reminded herself that this was not just about a simple bank errand anymore. It was about being treated fairly, not only for herself, but for others who had probably faced the same cold shoulders and dismissive attitudes before her. Maybe people like Brian and Karen had turned away plenty of folks who just wanted the respect they deserved. Every time she was met with another roadblock, Maya felt her resolve harden. It would have been easy to walk out and forget this morning ever happened, to tell herself it was not worth the trouble. But Maya was tired of letting these silent barriers stand unchallenged, the way none of the other staff or customers said anything, how some people even averted their eyes, stung almost as much as the words spoken directly to her. Yet, with each uncomfortable minute that dragged by, Maya became more certain that she would not give in. She was determined to stay until someone actually listened, and she would calmly but firmly demand the fair treatment she knew she was owed. When Maya walked back to the counter, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut through. Karen, still sitting behind the glass with her arms folded, greeted her return with a tight-lipped frown. Without missing a beat, Karen launched into a fresh round of questions, most of them pointless, all of them delivered in that same doubtful tone. "Are you sure this is your account? When did you open it? Why are you here today?" The list went on, and it became so clear that Karen was not only testing Maya's patience, but also trying to wear down her confidence. But Maya did not flinch. With each question, she answered clearly and steadily, making sure her voice did not waver. She pulled out every piece of identification she had, repeated her information, and kept her gaze level. Her responses left no room for doubt about who she was or why she was there. Maya knew, right then, that this was about more than a transfer or a formality. It was about demanding simple respect that everyone deserved. By holding her ground and refusing to let Karen's attitude shake her, Maya showed that she was not going to be pushed aside, that she deserved dignity every bit as much as anyone else in that bank. That was when Karen crossed a line. With an exaggerated sigh, she glanced at the check Maya had handed over and said, loud enough for others nearby to hear, "You don't really expect this to be real, do you?" The sarcasm in Karen's voice stung, and a couple of bank staff stifled quiet snickers from behind their monitors. It was one of those moments where the embarrassment felt like it had a weight to it, something everyone could sense, even if they tried to pretend otherwise. People shifted in their seats, some looking away, others sneaking glances in Maya's direction to see how she would react. But Maya did not let the laughter or the accusation shake her. She looked Karen straight in the eye and, without raising her voice, asked her to verify the check like she would for any other customer. There was no trace of anger, just a calm insistence that things should be done right. Her steady attitude seemed to catch Karen off guard for a second. Finally, clearly annoyed but unsure how to escalate things further without drawing more attention, Karen began to process the check. Tapping at her keyboard a little harder than normal, Maya stood her ground, refusing to be pushed into silence or shame. Just when it seemed like the standoff might finally end, the branch manager, Mr. Carter, arrived from his office at the back. He was a tall, older man, sharp in his navy suit, and his presence immediately turned everyone's attention his way. For a moment, Maya felt a tiny flicker of hope that maybe things would finally shift. She expected that with Mr. Carter there, someone in authority might look at her documents fairly and put an end to the nonsense, but instead of starting with a fresh perspective, Mr. Carter listened as Karen quickly gave her own version of what happened, making Maya sound unreasonable and difficult. Mr. Carter's face tightened, and he shot Maya a look filled with doubt, not even bothering to hide his skepticism. Without taking a proper look at her forms or the check, he cut her off. His words were final and cold, telling Maya that if she was unhappy with their service, she could try another bank on another street. The dismissal was harsh, and the way he spoke to her left no room for honest conversation. All the hope she had when he first appeared faded, replaced by a sting that felt even deeper than before. As Mr. Carter stepped away, Karen seemed to sense she now had free rein, her voice rising so all could hear. She pointedly questioned Maya's clothes and bag, tossing judgment into every word, as if that explained everything about the morning's trouble. "Honestly, does she really look like she belongs here?" Karen said, not bothering to lower her voice. A few more laughs followed, each one sharp and mean, bouncing around the lobby. Some customers stared openly, others whispered or avoided Maya's eyes, but most let the moment roll by without a word. It was the kind of scene Maya knew she would never forget, not so much for what was said as for the way the whole room seemed to shrink away, leaving her exposed. But Maya had promised herself she would not let the pain win. She blinked back any hint that she was rattled, gathered her papers and ID with steady hands, and quietly slipped them into her bag. The walk to the glass doors felt longer than usual. Before stepping out onto the busy Chicago street, Maya paused, looking back at the staff and the handful of customers still watching. In a calm, measured voice, she told them that disrespect like this never really disappears, and one day their words might come back around. Then she left, holding her head high. As Maya stepped out of the Riverside Avenue branch, the bustle of downtown Chicago pressed in around her, but she hardly noticed the city's usual warmth. Instead, a heavy sense of exclusion clung to her, colder than the breeze on her face. She took a few deep breaths along the sidewalk, trying not to let that feeling of powerlessness sink too deep. For a moment, it was tempting to just accept what happened as another story of someone being mistreated and move on, but deep down, Maya knew that silence had never solved anything. She would not let this day turn her into yet another person quietly accepting injustice. On her way back to the office, she kept turning things over in her mind. When she finally sat back at her desk in her corner office overlooking Lake Michigan, piles of contracts and business memos spread out in front of her. One folder stood out, the agreement worth hundreds of millions that her company, Maxwell Solutions, held with the very same First United Bank, where she had just been humiliated. Maya traced her finger along the bold signature at the bottom, her own. It was living proof of her skills and hard work, a reminder that her value existed whether or not those bank employees were willing to see it. That night, Maya spread out every piece of paperwork she could find on her kitchen table. There were meeting notes, invoices, signed contracts, and letters from high-level executives at First United Bank. As she sorted through the documents, she felt her earlier doubt melt away. Each page was proof that Maxwell Solutions was not just another vendor. They were a driving force behind some of the bank's biggest digital projects. The more she read, the more she realized that she had every right to walk in there with her head high. It was not her job to be ashamed. If anything, her experience the day before was just another reminder of the daily challenges that came with her position, but it was not a reflection of her worth. In the morning, after a cup of strong coffee and a few last checks of her files, Maya dressed strategically. She put on her best suit, a navy one with crisp lines, and slipped on a gold pin with the Maxwell Solutions emblem. Armed with a thick folder of evidence, she walked back through the bank's revolving doors. This time everyone noticed her. The same tellers and staff who had laughed or ignored her eyes now darted with sudden concern, glancing at each other as if trying to piece together who she really was. Not wasting any time, Maya walked straight to the reception and asked, in a clear but steady tone, to see Mr. Carter right away. There was no hesitation in her voice. She was done letting anyone treat her as less than she was. The receptionist, who yesterday had barely glanced her way, now scrambled to attention, her eyes widening as Maya handed over her business card. The bold print with Vice President Solutions Strategy, Maxwell Solutions, stood out. Seeing the title and the company's golden logo, the receptionist's confidence faded, and she rushed back to alert Mr. Carter about the unexpected visitor. A few minutes later, Maya sat in Mr. Carter's office, the thick folder open between them. She laid out each document, explaining how Maxwell Solutions had been critical to the bank's biggest projects. She did not need to raise her voice. The facts spoke for themselves. Maya finished by pointing out that if Maxwell Solutions ever decided to walk away from their partnership, First United Bank could lose contracts worth hundreds of millions. Mr. Carter's attitude shifted instantly, the arrogant air gone, replaced by discomfort and a worried silence. He realized he had seriously misjudged Maya, but she could tell an apology alone was not going to be enough this time. Maya sat across from Mr. Carter and made her position perfectly clear. She was not interested in hearing apologies that did not mean anything or empty promises to do better. What she wanted was respect and actual changes in the way people were treated, especially customers who did not fit the picture of what a valued client was supposed to look like. Her voice was steady as she spoke, and the seriousness in her eyes demanded that Mr. Carter really listen this time. As both of them sat there in the uncomfortable silence that followed, it was impossible to ignore that something important had shifted in the room. Mr. Carter looked down at the desk, quietly absorbing the consequences of his earlier choices. There was no more superior attitude, just an awkward understanding that his actions and the actions of his staff had crossed a line. Maya did not gloat. She picked up her folder, thanked him for his time, and left without another word. Stepping into the bright Chicago morning, she realized she had not just reclaimed her own dignity, she had forced those who wronged her to look at themselves and their assumptions. Of course, Maya understood the fight was not over. Real change meant reaching further than one office or one uncomfortable conversation. Not wanting to let the matter fade away with just a tense meeting and a few shaken employees, Maya went a step further. Still in her power suit, she called the executive offices and asked to speak directly with Linda Harris, the regional vice president of First United Bank. Surprised by the escalation, the secretary managed to squeeze Maya into Linda's packed schedule that very afternoon. A few hours later, Maya walked into the sleek, glass-walled boardroom on the top floor where the city skyline stretched out beyond the windows. This was a space where big choices were made about investments, policy, and the bank's direction. Linda Harris greeted her politely, but looked concerned, especially after catching sight of the contract Maya placed on the table. Maya started by laying out the entire story, describing everything that had happened in detail, from the rude comments in the lobby to the dismissive attitude upstairs. She explained how this was not just one bad day or a single employee behaving badly, but something much deeper, a pattern that put the reputation of the whole bank at risk. Linda listened carefully, her expression becoming more thoughtful as the conversation went on. She understood that what was at stake here was not just money, but trust, respect, and the future of the institution itself. Linda Harris, clearly shaken by the seriousness of everything Maya had laid out, assured her that action would be swift. She promised that the matter would not be brushed aside or lost in endless paperwork. That same day, Linda called for an urgent internal investigation. She sent out notices to everyone involved, making it clear that this was not a routine check, but a full review of what had happened and why. No one was left out, from the tellers at the front desk to the managers upstairs. Every email, security camera recording, and bit of paperwork from that day was put under the microscope. With news of the situation spreading through First United Bank's local branches, the whole atmosphere began to shift. People who once assumed their daily habits were fine started watching their own behavior and each other's much more closely. There were whispered conversations in break rooms and meetings where managers suddenly seemed nervous and stern. Where there used to be a sense of comfort and even arrogance, now there was a quiet worry. For the first time, employees understood that crossing certain lines would have real and possibly career-ending consequences. The old way of looking the other way was gone, replaced by the sharp awareness that change was arriving fast. The results of the investigation hit hard and came quickly. Within a week, everyone at First United Bank knew the details. Camera footage confirmed everything Maya had described, and there was no room for excuses. Natalie, the receptionist whose comments had started the whole problem, was fired on the spot once management saw the recordings of her behavior. It was clear she had not followed the most basic rules of respect and decency, and there was no way around it. Then there was Jessica, who had backed up Natalie and even encouraged the negative atmosphere. She was suspended for several weeks without pay and required to go through a demanding series of diversity and sensitivity training sessions before she could return. No one thought these steps were just for show. Now, everyone realized the bank was serious about real change. Mr. Carter, the branch manager who had ignored Maya's warnings, did not escape the consequences either. He was demoted to an administrative job far from client interaction, stripped of any authority to make decisions. Meanwhile, Sarah, the assistant who had gossiped and nervously fanned the flame, chose to resign after seeing where things were headed. Her departure was proof the old ways would no longer slide, as the bank's new strict approach became a warning throughout the company. As the dust settled from the wave of consequences, First United Bank moved forward with sweeping changes. Every employee, no matter their position, had to attend new mandatory workshops about inclusion and respect. There was no rolling of eyes or skipping out. Participation was checked, and everyone knew management meant business. Along with these trainings, the bank introduced an entirely new department focused solely on fairness and equity. This team was given real authority. They evaluated every process, from how customers were greeted to who was promoted, making sure no bias slipped through unnoticed. Linda Harris decided she could not just hand off these duties. She took it on herself to track how these programs unfolded, holding regular check-ins and asking for honest feedback from employees. She even set up an anonymous suggestion system so people could share concerns without fear. Slowly, the mood inside the bank's halls began to shift. People stopped glancing nervously over their shoulders and started greeting one another with more care. There were more questions, more listening, and far fewer assumptions in staff meetings. It became clear that every little choice mattered, every tone, every word could either lift someone up or hurt them. The staff began to recognize that change was not just about training, but about real, everyday actions. While those who had been caught up in prejudice at First United Bank dealt with their own consequences and started down paths of personal change, Maya took a different route altogether. She did not rush to sue the bank or try to grab headlines on the evening news. Instead, she put her effort towards something she believed would last much longer than any public controversy. Drawing on the experience that had shaken her, Maya launched a project she called Bridge Forward, a leadership and skills initiative aimed at supporting young people and women from communities that too often faced barriers. She spent her weekends and evenings working out the details, building partnerships with local Chicago nonprofits and colleges. Before long, Bridge Forward was holding regular workshops in church basements, community centers, and even some small businesses around the city. Maya led the sessions herself at first, telling her story and inviting others to share their own. People who took part said the workshops gave them practical tips for the workplace, but even more important, gave them real hope and a sense of belonging. What meant most to Maya was seeing these participants step forward, more confident and bold, willing to challenge unfair treatment. For Maya, turning pain into purpose became her way of helping everyone win. Recognition for Maya's work arrived in a way she never expected. One afternoon, she received a formal invitation in her mailbox from First United Bank, now working alongside several civic organizations. They wanted her to speak at their annual Leaders for Change conference, a big event at McCormick Place downtown, packed with business leaders, community activists, and even a few people who had doubted her efforts when all this started. When the day came, Maya stood backstage and took a deep breath. She wore a simple dress and carried no fancy notes, just her own steady conviction. When she stepped out under the bright lights, the crowd fell quiet. She shared some pieces of her journey, but spoke mostly about possibility. Then she looked around the packed hall and asked a question that hung in the air. What if, every time we met someone new, we trusted that person's worth right away? For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Everyone just took it in. The message landed deeply with people in the room, including some of her old skeptics. Walking back off stage, Maya realized her story had grown beyond herself. Her courage now reached others, helping spark change far beyond what she could have imagined when it all began.